The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson is a 1959 horror novel that follows the story of Dr. John Montague, two of his assistants, and a man who is set to inherit Hill House in the future, and their quest to see if ghosts are real. And they use Hill House as a vessel to test that question by trying to drag out the spirits that are supposed to inhabit Hill House, and all of them have their own paranormal experiences and change as people because of it. And it's written by Shirley Jackson, who is a classic horror novelist whose most famous book besides Hill House is We Have Always Lived in the Castle, which is a widely regarded horror classic, and she's even inspired the king himself, Stephen King, who used the first paragraph of Hill House to intro one of his scariest and most famous books, Salem's Lot. And the setting, as the name might suggest, is Hill House. And the story takes place in, I guess, the late 1950s. So Hill House is described as being 80 years old then. So that puts it in the late 1800s being built. And it has a long and dark history of death and treachery and families breaking apart inside of it and people sneaking in the night and stealing things and a feud between two sisters. But really all you need to know is that it's a dark place and it has a dark history. So right off the bat, I was really impressed by that. It's all given to you in the first couple chapters, so it really ropes you in and it makes you feel like you are a character in the house, and it just is a really imposing place, and that's described in the quote, "I'm like a small creature swallowed whole by a monster," by the Eleanor character. And Eleanor is our main character. Most of the story is seen through her eyes, and she begins as a really timid woman. She's been kind of pushed around her whole life by her mom or her sister, and she gets an invite from Dr. Montague to go to Hill House and research with him, and she takes it up and she steals her sister's car and runs away into the countryside, and she feels really freed by it. And when she gets to Hill House, she meets Theodora, who is her quickly becomes her close friend, and the two of them really push through their experience at the house together, and they form a really tight bond. And Theodora helps Eleanor come out of her skin and really be a outgoing person. And Theodora herself is very, very outgoing. She's confident and funny, and but she does hide her own insecurities behind being very loud and brave. But also, through Eleanor's help and just over the course of the story, starts to deal with that, and she faces her own issues, and both women become better people after the events. And the other characters are Dr. Montague and Luke Sanderson. So Luke Sanderson is not part of the investigation per se. He's going to inherit Hill House in the future, and he wants to observe and just kind of get a taste of what he's going to be inheriting. And Dr. Montague is the figurehead of the whole story. He's the leader. He's charging into the house gung-ho to see if these ghosts are real. And he's a very smart man, but he's been kind of put aside by all of his colleagues because they think he's a little crazy for really going this far into believing ghosts. But he does prove them wrong eventually. But he's really a just kind of straight character the whole time. He doesn't change much. He has his flaws of hiding information from other characters because he thinks he's helping them, but it really leads to some awful things for them. And then Luke starts off the story as just this kind of arrogant and just kind of sneaky guy, but he also, like the other two characters, Theodora and Eleanor, he really becomes a better person, and he sees what's wrong, and he works to fix that. And an example of Dr. Montague just kind of knowing everything from the start is this quote here is essentially, the evil is the house itself, I think. It's enchained and destroyed its people and their lives, is a place of contained ill will, which I'm going to get to in a second. But first, I really want to talk about why a lot of people might know of this story or of Hill House is because of the Netflix show, which is fantastic, and I really recommend to anybody who's looking for a show. And I will warn you, it's creepy. I like to think I don't scare easily, but this show did kind of give me the chills sometimes. It's very spooky and scary, but it's nothing horrifying. It's nothing horrific. It's very well done. It's very well made, and it really gives you a great just feeling of uneasiness throughout the whole show. But the show and the book, sorry, are two completely different stories, which I'm happy about, because that means if you like one, you'll probably like the other one. And it's like I watched the show first, and then I read the book, and I watched the show, really liked it, and then the book just gave me more. It just gave me more of this substance and this place, which I really, really loved. So depending on, you read the book and want more, watch the show. If you watch the show and want more, read the book. Now, the show is, its main difference is kind of everything really, but it keeps some things the same. So the show premise is, let's take the place of Hill House, this just horrible, horrible manor with a dark history that's filled with ghosts, and let's put a family in it. And let's also show the same family decades in the future, where all the kids are grown up and only the dad is left. And it then follows the story of this family, starting when they first arrive and then going on. And it's told through two different stories at a parallel. So you have the young family, and then you have the grown-up family. And each episode plays out as either starting with the young or starting with the old, but it, through either flashbacks or flash forwards, it shows the story consistently, and it follows itself, and then it all wraps it up in a really, really satisfying way. And the main similarities are the names of characters. So the 5 children are Eleanor, or Nellie, or Nell, Theodora, or Theo in the show, Shirley, and Steve. Shirley and Steve are not in the book, but they're created for the show, but they're really fantastic characters, and I enjoyed them in the show a lot, and I'm kind of glad they're not in the book, because it still, it keeps that difference, but they are a very welcome addition to the story. And then Luke, who's the youngest boy, and Luke, Eleanor, and Theodore are all characters from the book, obviously, but they're not the same. They're very different in the show. They really just have the same names. And that's about all for the similarities and differences between the show and the book, except the father character, Hugh, who is actually Hugh Crane. It's the Crane family, and Hugh Crane is mentioned in the book as building Hill House, but he hasn't built it in the show. He buys it. But Hugh Crane in the show and Dr. Montague in the book are both kind of similar characters. They kind of mirror each other in the sense that they're the kind of protector of all the other characters. They go to him for advice or help, and he does want to help them, and he does care for them, but he cares for them in the way that he thinks that lying to them and hiding information from them will keep them safe, when it really is a detriment to them, and it makes them all worse. But both characters do, without going into spoilers, through ways work on that and such. This is another shot from the show of the grown-up characters. The middle there is Eleanor, and she's not the main character of the show as she is in the book. There really isn't a main character in the show. It really bounces around, and each episode focuses on different characters and different storylines, but they all get a pretty much equal amount of time, either in the past or the present or both. But Eleanor is definitely a major character in the show more than others because she kind of kicks off the story almost in the future. But my closing thoughts are about the book. It's a fantastic book. It's a really great read. My biggest issue with it was it takes a little while to build up to the more scary elements. Because, of course, I read it hoping for it to be scary as well as a good book. But looking back on it, I was frustrated that it took about a little more than halfway into the book for some scary things to start happening. Which, while I was reading it, I was just a little. It got to a point where I was getting a little bored. Like the kind of ooh ah of the beginning had started to wear off, and I was just waiting for something to happen. But looking back, I think it's more of a good build up, kind of. If anybody, it reminds me of if anybody's watched the Conjuring, the first half an hour of that movie, really nothing much happens besides little things, and that does an excellent job of just kind of pushing at you and poking you to be like, oh, it's something scary is going to happen, but you don't know when it's going to happen. And that really is effective at being scary in itself because you're on your toes for a lot of it. But I do feel it got dragged out a little bit too much to the point where, for me, I was just a little bored. So when something did finally happen, I don't think it had the same effect it would have if it had happened a little bit earlier when I wasn't really anticipating it. But overall, I think every character except Dr. Montague is really solid. But the thing is that Dr. Montague isn't really needed to be a super fleshed out character because he's more of an audience character. He kind of provides information for the audience in a way. And then he does have a role with other characters, but he kind of stays the same throughout the whole story. But my final thoughts are I really highly recommend this book to almost anybody. I mean, if horror really, really, really isn't your thing, I wouldn't recommend it. It's definitely not as scary as the show. Also, because the show's visual, and that always, at least for me, I'm more freaked out by visual things than things on paper. But if you're looking for a more suspenseful, just really eerie, slow burn book, I really recommend The Haunting of Hill House. And if you need a show, definitely The Haunting of Hill House, the show. So if I had to give this out of 10, I'd probably give it an 8.5. I really was kind of rubbed the wrong way about how slow it is for a good couple chapters, but it redeems itself in the end, and it really does pick up. So I hope, if you're interested, that you'll check either the book or the show out, and that's that.